Доброго ранку. Good morning. Шановні учасники, колеги, друзі, я рада вас привітати всіх тут на другому форумі доброго врядування. I have to tell you that I am just delighted to be here today in Kyiv with you at an Aspen event in the most beautiful autumn day in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Count myself lucky. Ми всі тут є свідками того, що як стрімке розповсюдження цифрових технологій сформувало новий вимір життя людини в сучасному світі. Близько 4,5 мільярди людей, більше половина людства є дієвими мешканцями глобального цифрового простору. Їх повсякденна діяльність, винаходи та інновації на наших очах змінюють соціальний ландшафт як окремих спільнот, так і цілих країн. Змінюється ринок праці, зростають масштаби політичної мобілізації, розширюються можливості для якісної освіти, розвиваються нові економічні галузі, тісно пов'язані з цими цифровими технологіями. Але поруч з можливостями цих масштабних змін ми бачимо і серйозні виклики. Тому Aspen Інститут Київ разом з партнерами, координатором проєктів ОБСЄ, колеги з румунського та німецького Aspen інститутів та Aspen ініціативою для Європи вирішив присвятити цьогорічний форум доброго врядування саме цим викликам, їх значенню та наслідкам для демократичного суспільного устрою, його інституцій, практик та цінностей. Попри цілий ряд новацій, що ними ми завдячуємо проникненню цифрових технологій у всі сфери життя, нам доведеться спільно шукати відповідей на одвічні питання, що залишились у фокусі уваги протягом тисячоліть. Це свобода та відповідальність, безпека та захист прав людини, свобода слова та приватність, а також інших значущих для демократичного суспільства питань. Від якості нашого розуміння цифрового простору, від залученості і координації зусиль представників різних професійних спільнот та різних країн без перебільшення залежатиме здатність людства до вирішення цих глобальних проблем. Сьогодні разом з нашими спікерами, які приїхали до нас з різних країн та представляють дуже різні галузі та організації, ми проаналізуємо можливі впливи масштабного впровадження штучного інтелекту, обговоримо цифрові медіа та цифрові права в контексті цінностей доброго врядування та виваженої державної політики. Ми щиро сподіваємось, що досвід та знання наших спікерів допоможуть українським політикам в цей дуже історичний момент нашого розвивання краще зрозуміти пріоритети подальшої роботи в цьому напрямі. Я ще раз хочу дякувати всім, хто долучився до організації цього форуму, і запрошую пані Олену Boytsun, модератора першої панельної дискусії. Just a few words in English. For those of you that don't have translation, I probably should have waited, but raise your hands in case for the rest of the event you'd like to hear the Ukrainian speakers. Raise your hands and get some translation. Hi, Jan. We need translation on this side, over here in the middle. There's a person in the second row. So those of you that didn't hear what I had to say, I'll just very quickly say that we've brought together, I believe, an incredible group of speakers from all over the world, from all kinds of organizations, to discuss with you today the demands on society that have been created both by the positives that technology has brought us, but also the risks that we face with these new technologies. Every democracy has to look at those risks seriously, whether those risks are privacy, whether those risks are security. And today we hope to have a dialogue with you that will bring you into this dialogue and help all of us at this very important time in Ukrainian history, at this very important moment in Ukraine's development, to focus on those benefits and risks and help our government leaders to make the best use of the practices, the knowledge, and experiences that are here in this room. So thank you very much, and I'd like to introduce Olena Boytsun, who is our moderator for the next panel.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and I would love to join you to join our panel. Applauses for Natalie Jaresko, the chairperson of the Aspen Kyiv Institute. And I would love also to invite for us to join Ambassador Henrik Villadsen, the coordinator of OSCE in Ukraine, and also our guest from US, Elliot Gerson, the executive vice president of the Aspen Institute, USA. My name is Olena Boytsun. I'm leading portfolio in Central and Eastern Europe for Luminate, which is a philanthropic investment firm by Piero Midyar. Our mission is to build stronger and fair societies, and that is why the subject of technology and how to use technology in the most efficient way, especially in government services, is one of our key priorities. That's why I'm tremendously happy that we have this forum today devoted to the questions of good governance in the aspects of digital age. Our panel is called the Democratic Governance in Digital Age. And I think the subject of good governance that we will discuss the whole day is practically the concept that should lead any country to democratic governance. Before we start our discussion, I would really love to give a floor to our speakers for a very short introduction on how you see the subject today for us to start the discussion afterwards. So Natalia, probably we would start with you.
So once again, thank you very much. As someone who has been both in the private sector, in government here in Ukraine, now leading a government effort in Puerto Rico, I find that technology is a huge supporter of the work that we're trying to do. When we came into the situation we came into in Ukraine, it was technology, transparency, the ability to provide civil society the information, the data, about what the reality was that created, I believe, a platform for civil society to demand more of governance in Ukraine. Without information, that was impossible. With information, whether it was e-data, whether it was the e-budget, whether it was the public platform for the discussion of tax reform, that type of digital knowledge, digital availability, gave society the tools with which to demand more from their governance. And I think that in this respect, digital technology has been a great source of support for civil society and for democracy, for hearing intelligent views from civil society. Now, believe it or not, in Puerto Rico, where I am now, which is part of the United States, a territory of the United States, they don't have half, not even half, of the transparency that Ukraine enjoys in terms of fiscal data, in terms of tax, in terms of incentives. And I spend a lot of my time comparing Puerto Rico's financial situation to Ukraine, saying Ukraine provides its people a voice because digital technologies have provided the data to give people the voice. And so Ukraine, I believe, is a leader compared to many European nations, a leader compared to most of the United States in terms of its use of digital technology. And today, when the government has announced that they'd like to have Ukrainian government in a smartphone, I'm not sure how that translates. I mean, I think it becomes even more and more important that these digital technologies can be used for good, will be used for good, to ease life, to give people more of a voice in their democracy.
Thank you, Natalia. So you're a clear supporter of technologies and government services. Henrik, what about you? What's your opinion about the topic?
Thank you. Thank you, Olena. First of all, let me say it's a pleasure for me to be here today to take part in this very important discussion. As you may know, the office that I lead, the OSCE Project Coordination Mission in Ukraine, we are tasked to help and support Ukraine. We've been doing that for the last 20 years on behalf of the now 57 participating states of the OSCE to help build stronger democratic institutions, strengthen the rule of law and good governance. But we also work very much, as I'll explain a bit later, in addressing the new security challenges that we all face, be it cyber crimes, be it actually also more practical security challenges, such as mines and unexploded ordnance in the east of the country, and even potentially looming chemical and environmental disasters in that part of the country. Today's topic, very important for us too, as digital change creates new opportunities as well as new threats in practically every sphere that we work with, and we see great opportunities on how we can expand and help Ukraine look into these opportunities and threats. Also, as I will talk a little bit about later, we promote dialogue through bridging differences and finding best solutions. And also here, the digital change, I foresee, will play quite a large role. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Henrik. And Elliot, please share your views.
Yes, first of all, it's always a pleasure for me, representing the Aspen Institute in the United States, to be here in Kyiv. I first came here with just the dream of having an Aspen Institute well over a decade ago, and to see what Natalie and Yulia and Denise and all of their colleagues have done is really an inspiration to us at Aspen in the United States. And as you saw earlier, Aspen now has flags firmly rooted all across the world. This topic, I think, is one of the most important topics that we can entertain. It's a global topic, and it's a global crisis. And I would describe that as really a crisis in democracy, and that it is imperative to restore trust in democracy. And a key element of that trust has to be the strength of a trusted, free, and independent media. And digital media has offered enormous potential benefit to democratize access to information. But let's be honest, it has also caused enormous threat, challenge, and harm, as misinformation and disinformation has been weaponized in so many countries around the world. It's an urgent crisis. When you combine declining public trust in democracy and in government, along with declining public trust in the media, the essential independent partner to effective governance, you have a crisis. And fortunately, there are solutions, but they won't be easy. And those solutions involve multiple elements. This is not a problem that government can solve alone. It is not a problem that technology companies can solve alone. It is not a problem that media companies can solve alone. And it is certainly not a problem that individual citizens can solve alone. But if it is to be solved, it requires committed action by all of those players, by government, by the media, by technology companies, and by citizens, to become more responsible in their own behavior and attitudes, and to better understand the differences between disinformation, misinformation, and the fundamental factual information that must exist for democracies to function as we wish them to.
Thank you, Elliot. It seems that we will have a very interesting discussion on both opportunities and challenges of technology in the digital age. But before starting this discussion, I think it's really important to tell more about the core values and core mission of the Aspen Institute. Because the mission of the Aspen Institute is to empower leaders while enduring values. What do you think, in this digital age, is the term of values, like good values, and the terms of good society, is it different than it was in the pre-social media and pre-digital age?
Yes, there's no question that fundamentally all of the Aspen Institutes revolve around questions of values and leadership. And it's no accident that, for example, in the United States, the Aspen Institute, through the support of a major American foundation called the Knight Foundation, just this past year sponsored a national commission on trust, media, and democracy. And I'd urge you all to take a look at the report of that document. But yes, I think Aspen is an ideal instrument to bring the parties together to deal with these issues. First of all, to have dialogue among leaders to understand how we got to this point. How we got to this point where almost everywhere in the world there is a struggle for the media to do their job, which is to hold governments accountable, to hold the powerful accountable. But when you have a media world that has been revolutionized by digital media, social media, struggling to find new ways to be effective, it is imperative that leaders ask questions about what can be done to turn around a situation such as we have. Now, there are many causes for this declining trust in government, and it's not just because of the media. Government has not done an effective job in many countries dealing with the biggest challenges we have. For example, I think one reason that the public in many countries is so open to falsehood and propaganda is the fact that for many people in the world, especially since 2008, the economy has failed them. And you've got a growing gap between the rich and everyone else. And as a result of that, people are angry and resentful, understandably. And when people are angry and resentful, it's easy for them to succumb to various forms of misinformation and poor information. And at the same time, we have, in part because of that development and inequality, you have political polarization. In many countries in the world, certainly in the United States, it is a more hyper-partisan, polarized situation than at any point in my lifetime. And then we read, the daily inanities going on in the oldest democracy in Europe, in Britain, with Brexit. A badly broken society that's highly partisan. And you have to look at the conditions there, but there is no solution unless people can have trust, not just in their government, but in their media. And Aspen institutes can play a role in bringing leaders together from government, from media, from technology and civil society to confront these terrible threats to democracy and come up with sensible ways to restore trust in government, to restore trust in media, to support media as it's been challenged to find a new financial model because of the advertising that now goes to places like Google and Facebook that used to go to support independent newspapers and broadcasters. So it's a complicated issue, but fundamental, and one in which institutions like Aspen, and it has to be solved on a nonpartisan basis, must do something to turn this around.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you also use an open dialogue as a tool to promote good governance in Ukraine. Is it working? Is it really instruments that can trigger good governance?
Thank you. To very briefly answer your question, I would say yes, it works. But let me elaborate a bit before I jump to that conclusion. We have, from our office side, promoted dialogue as a professionally managed and organized way of communicating that helps people throughout Ukraine with divergent views to find ways to cooperate, even though they do not necessarily agree with each other on everything, especially when there is a clash of values. And I want to underline the word professional. The OSCE has a developed methodology for conducting dialogue, and we, in our programs, we do the dialogue along those principles, and of course tailored to the particular needs of Ukraine. So it's not just a question of us going out talking to people. It is us bringing together typically government representatives, civil society, etc., setting people down for a number of days to conduct dialogue over any given relevant issue that we have identified together with representatives of the government of Ukraine. It's not always about reaching immediate agreements, making immediate concrete results, but it's a question of getting people in contact with each other, having them understand each other's often diverging viewpoints, and working forward from there. It's a question of, I think, bringing people to a position, if there is a points of contention, that they do not necessarily perceive each other as enemies. It's a question of getting them to accept that they may have differences, and having differences in view and having an understanding of the difference in view. In our experience, progress often gets easier from there. Included in this dialogue programs or projects, it's also a big element that we train trainers. We continuously develop a larger pool of people that can go out and facilitate dialogue and mediate between people. We have an internal training program where we bring the mediators together and where they discuss the achievements that they've had and the experiences that they've had. We've been supporting dialogue between government and civil societies in a large number of spheres over the last 5 years. It's been everything from restoring cooperation between conflict-affected communities and government. It's been into support the process of amalgamation of communities in the decentralization process that has taken place. It has been to deal with education challenges in the context of minority languages, etc. And I think we have seen quite a lot of benefits in those fields. And I think it's, in a way, it is filtering down a bit. When we started it out 5 years ago, I would not say that the officials that we wanted to involve in the dialogue activities, I would not say that they were suspicious, but I don't really think that they believed in that it would bring results, and it could be a good tool to use on the way ahead. But lately, the last year or so, we've seen a large increase in the requests that we are getting from various government agencies to use or to have them included in our dialogue activities. So I think there is a growing understanding that it's necessary that people talk about how to move things ahead. As an example, and I will be brief, as an example, just a short while ago, the State Agency for Civil Service contacted us and asked us to be a formal partner of theirs in a dialogue project, which is an example of a state agency that we've not worked with before, who was interested in taking us up on this always standing offer of this professionally facilitated dialogue. So I think it works. Otherwise, we wouldn't have seen a greater interest from, in particular, the government side to have more and more of it. And I personally believe that also, as Elliot said, that the more communication, the more cooperation there is between people about the values that we all stand for, the better. So yes, I do think it works.
Thank you, Henrik. It was very convincing, and thank you for sharing your experience in this sphere as well. So we all know that main principles of good governance is transparency, accountability, rule of law, inclusivity. And with this in mind, I would love to ask Natalia, what is your experience with technologies? So you mentioned that there are a lot of positive examples how technology can be used for democracies. Maybe you have something in mind with this kind?
So I guess I start from the position, and most of you won't remember, but when there was no internet and we were reliant on traditional media to provide our information, many of us lived in the dark with regard to the detail of governance. And now with the internet, we have the opportunity to have access to data and to information. And that information then provides you as a voting citizen with the ability to express your agreement or disagreement with what's happening. Obviously, I'm a former Minister of Finance, so I'll use the example of e-data and the budget transparency system that exists in Ukraine. When we first introduced that in Ukraine, people didn't really understand how to use it, what to look at. When we introduced Prozoro in Ukraine for transparent bidding on contracts, for making procurement more transparent, people didn't quite understand what the value of it would be. But in the end, what happened was that every citizen in every town and every oblast could look at the way that their government their Ciscarada, their local council, was using their taxpayer dollars, and they could say, you know what? I don't agree with that. You haven't fixed the roads in a decade. And instead, you're buying new cars, or you're painting the inside of your offices, or you're buying new office furniture. And that literally is what happened when the information started to be available to people. People started to take and see and make judgments about how the monies were being used, and to complain. And ultimately, what we saw in the election, to vote people out of office as a result of not agreeing with much of the data, much of the information that they had access to. Now, I think the Prozoro contracting system, people focus on, the fact that by having the contracts being bid in a transparent fashion, we get to see price. We get to see what you're purchasing. I can give you an example. There was a state-owned company that tried to buy, some of you will remember, tried to buy an armored car for their CEO. When they announced the bid, society reacted terribly and said, how dare you buy an armored car? If you have the money in your state company to buy an armored car, purchase a tank for the boys on the front. And eventually they didn't even buy the car. Public pressure was so great that that was not an appropriate use of monies. But Prozoro did something more than just give you visibility into pricing and purchasing. It gave visibility to small and medium-sized businesses who were locked out of these competitions. For the longest time, it gave them the ability to participate, to bid, to win, to provide and supply for government. It opened up a whole new segment of the economy. Instead of just my friend or my brother's friend or my cum's friend or my cum bidding, all of a sudden it was open to everyone. And so it actually had an economic effect above and beyond the civil society democracy effect of strengthening your view and your vote and your information. Now, we're all living in silos. And I think, after flooding people with information, the next stage of technology and use of technology in government has got to be to help provide analytical ability. Because at some point, we went from having no information, no data, to now we're flooded with data. We don't know what to do with it. What does it mean? And society isn't necessarily prepared to make the types of analyses that they need to. So you need to be able to look back. You need to look forward. You need to see where the past was and how the monies have been trending, not just at a given time, but how much have we invested in education? And how have we invested in education? Have we invested in our teachers or our buildings? Have we invested in our students or in the administration? And to start looking not just at the number, how much went to the Department of Education, but how did we spend that? On a per capita, on a per student basis, has it grown? Has it declined? Is this the single most important value, the education of our students? Or is it something else? And so I think we're now at the stage in Ukraine where having data is great, and it's much more than we've ever had. And it's had seriously positive effects on democracy and the strength of every individual's role, and on expanding the economy. But the next stage is to now start providing additional analytical value to it, so we can go from simply what's being thrown at us to understanding how to use that data to create a better government and a better governance system.
Thank you, Natalie, especially for bringing an example of Prozoro as investors into Prozoro, Dozoro, and open contracting standard. We are very happy that this is a great case that actually brings also Ukraine very remarkably on the subject of good governance internationally, because Prozoro is the best case of using open contracting standard, which means that it could be replicable in any other country, and that's why our team is already leading this sphere internationally. So again, I think this is a great example how Ukraine market itself on the good governance international map. Henrik, just to continue on this, what kind of positive sides of technology you see? Is, for example, the electronic service delivery is a good path to good governance?
Yes, I'm well aware that I spoke quite a bit before, and I still have quite a bit to say. So let me limit my response to this to one example where I think that our work provided a prominent success story that very well demonstrates how technology can enhance and support democracy. It's about elections, and as we all know, there's been quite a lot of elections in Ukraine this year. Before we helped establish a central digital database of people who are eligible to vote, called the Electronic Register of Voters. Before that, the accuracy of voter lists was a big problem that could undermine the electoral process. On the election days before, you could come to vote and you could fail to find your name on the list. Instead, you would find the names of your deceased grandparents. You would find lists of people who did not live in the vicinity of the polling station anymore. You will even find people who had moved to other countries, etc., etc. Now, all that through a project we ran together with the Central Election Commission, it's centralized and well managed in a database where you can check even online if you're on the list in advance of going to the polling station. So you don't have to go there with the risk of going there in vain as you did before. And it's even, of course, well, even through this central registration, it's also impossible for one person to vote at more than one polling station, which was also a big problem before. So I think that's these are big steps forward in terms of preventing fraud and manipulation, aided by technological development. It's sort of probably the best example I can think of where we have specifically helped democratic governance through technological advancement. Of course, as always, new challenges are of course now posed by the fact that this registry contains the names of more than 35 million of Ukrainian voters, and that needs to be protected from cyber threats, etc. And we are now working on the second phase of this project together with Central Election Commission to enhance the protection of the register. Sorry, that short example was not as short as I meant it to be, but there you go.
Okay, so that was all the positive things, but Elliot, you mentioned already in your opening speech some challenges that technology brings into a democratic world. Especially you mentioned digital media. So do you think that the role of digital media is different in good governance? Is it your main concern for digital age, or is it any other trends that you're concerned about?
Well, I wish I could be more optimistic about where we stand now with respect to these challenges. I mean, we all think back to the beginnings of digital media and social media and the inherent opportunities to democratize information. We think back to the Arab Spring and the excitement about how social media could spread democracy. And then today, you look at the effects of social media affected by propaganda, affected by cyber attacks, affected by trolls, affected by virulent hatred, and how it affects so many countries. And you look at how the digital media, social media have also harmed the traditional model of the for-profit media. Media companies, look, in the United States now, local news is disappearing, the kind of news that most people rely on for information about what's going on in their own small towns and communities, because the advertising is all going to places like Google and other social media. So people are retreating to social media that is becoming increasingly vulnerable to forces in society that are motivated by exclusion and hate and conspiracy. These are serious issues that are affecting all countries. And so I think it is extraordinarily important that all countries and all civil societies work on solutions, including much greater transparency on the part of media companies, much greater transparency on the part of technology companies, explaining who's paying for advertising, where it's coming from, operating very quickly to eliminate disinformation and misinformation. And there's often a very fine line because we have to have a free press. But when forces that are fundamentally against democracy are hijacking so much of our digital media for their own illiberal purposes, you know, whether it's you know, in Russia or in Hungary or in Turkey or the Philippines or in the United States, in many places, these are things that we have to address. And citizens need to learn more themselves. When we work in companies, we are instructed how to recognize cyber attacks, how to recognize, to protect our companies and our information. Citizens increasingly need to be trained how to recognize false information, propaganda, conspiracy, and so we can't just sit back and let government solve all of these problems. I mean, right now, I actually think that the internet, in the context of democracy and a free press, is actually causing more harm than good. And that is not a situation that we can long countenance.
Natalie, do you agree with Elliot?
I just do. I think, you know, I like to talk about the positive things, but I'm also a member of the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity, along with my colleague Marietta Shatki, who's going to be speaking later. And one of the things we do there is working kind of globally to see how technology is interfering in elections, in your democratic rights. It certainly came from the first attacks on the US election, and what we noticed after focusing on that US election was that it was happening throughout the world. And it wasn't just one player, Russia. China's involved. We recently met with the foreign minister of Taiwan, who complained about the same type of intrusion, intervention, misinformation, falsehoods being introduced into a democratic election period and potentially changing outcomes. In Australia, they have this problem. In Canada, they've had this problem. The Balkans have experienced it. When we think back to Ukrainian history, we think of, you know, the election with the karoseli, with the voters that were transferring, and it was a very kind of naive form of cheating in elections. The methodologies that technology has brought to interfere, intervene, and distort your election rights, your voting rights, are so much more sophisticated today. And one of the things I know we're going to talk about later today is artificial intelligence, which can be used to make this even more complicated, even more dangerous. And we spend a lot of time talking to foreign governments. No one has really prepared for this. No one has really taken the time to fully implement security protocols to protect your democratic rights. And so I think that as we talk about the challenges later today, it's probably one of the most difficult spaces for all governments today, because the challenge of freedom of speech, freedom of media, if you're a democracy, to controlling disinformation, misinformation, false information, produced information, is probably the single most difficult thing for governments to do today.
And I believe it will be also discuss the new subject that appears with all these challenges, is the subject of digital rights. So what is the sphere of digital rights, how we should protect it, how different they are from human rights in general. So I hope all our participants will enjoy the rich discussions later in the day. So unfortunately our time comes to the end, but I don't want to leave without discussing what are the practical steps that all your organizations are doing in these spheres. So Elliot, what is the strategy of the Aspen Institute US to address challenges of technology, but also to enhance the opportunities?
I'm sorry, what are the opportunities for the Aspen Institute to address these problems?
So how you address this?
Yeah, no, I think this is really one of our biggest imperatives. And again, I mentioned, and I urge you to take a look on our website at something called the Knight Commission on Trust, Media, and Democracy, where we make very clear recommendations about what the media should do, what technology companies need to do, and frankly, what we all as citizens need to do to deal with these challenges. I think we're going to be we've talked about election integrity. It is incredibly important to protect the election integrity in democracies around the world. They are under attack. And it's not always that the countries are attacking them because they prefer candidate X or candidate Y. There are countries in the world, autocratic countries, that benefit from chaos. They benefit from people despairing the quality of democracy. They benefit from sowing dissent, because many of those countries, they cannot survive themselves. They are struggling, they are not doing well for their people. So it is in their interest to make other countries look bad and fail. And that's now a problem everywhere. So we have to increase our vigilance, but I think there are solutions. There are some solutions that are more complicated. I personally think we need to break up some of the technology companies. I think they're too large. But I think we need to enforce transparency. They must act more quickly when they see false news, disinformation, misinformation, deep flakes. I mean, it's horrifying some of the things that are out there. We have to do these things, and places like the Aspen Institute here in Kyiv and around the world, I think, have an opportunity to bring responsible people together from business, from government, from media, from technology, and from civil society, and to try to solve these problems, some of which include just improving ways for citizens to engage with each other. Right now, so many people just live in their little isolated tech bubbles, listening to other people who have their own fears and conspiracies. And the other thing is that media must understand its responsibility to be fair and accurate and unbiased, and act as a fiduciary of sorts to actually filter the quality of what is being broadcast and published, not to eliminate responsible opinions, but to eliminate falsehood and propaganda.
Thank you, Elliot. Henrik, what would be your closing address to the audience?
Sorry.
What would be your closing remarks to the audience? You shared a lot of interesting examples. Would you recommend, for example, the audience to take a deeper look into it?
Thank you. I would actually like to return to a couple of the points that Elliot raised previously. It may seem that digital change has changed the world dramatically, but let me just try to play a curveball here and say that I think from the point of view of the values that the OSCE represents, is defending democracy, rule of law, human rights, good governance. I think that many of the key challenges, that they actually remain the same. It's a question of, I think, finding the right balance between responding to threats on one hand, and on the other hand, keeping freedoms intact. For example, I don't think we need we do need to find approaches to curb waves of propaganda, fake news, hate speech in social networks, for example. But these matters are already recognized as global security challenges. But on the other hand, if in the process we will have governments or corporations censoring the content of our communications, this will mean this will mean the end of free speech. It will mean the end of free media as we know it, and we will end up with an even greater security challenge. Again, don't want to take too much of your time, but this is of course not a specifically new problem, but you know, with the events after 9/11, etc., there has been a lot of development in the whole anti-terrorism initiatives throughout the world, etc. And I just want to draw your attention to the South African writer J.M. Coetzee, who won the Nobel Prize some years ago, who was, of course, a big opponent of apartheid, etc., to such an extent he actually rescinded his South African citizenship and became an Australian. He said in 2005, "I used to think that the people who created South Africa's laws that effectively suspended the rule of law were moral barbarians. Now I realize that they were just pioneers ahead of their time, And I think that is pretty much where we are now. We have to find that balance between regulating the damaging elements of this digital age we are in now, but where at the same time we uphold the rule of law and we uphold our own freedoms.
Thank you so much, Henrik. Natalie, so as we are closing this opening panel, I think it's really important if you could share the thinking of Aspen Kyiv Institute on this subject.
So today is really the beginning of a dialogue here at Aspen Institute Kyiv on this subject. With the support of Luminate, we will be putting together an expert discussion, an ongoing expert discussion called Digital Threats to Democracy. And because Aspen Kyiv is such a unique platform that brings together people from different geographies, different roles, different sectors of the economy, different income levels, it really provides for a platform, I believe, that you will enjoy, that your colleagues will enjoy, and that will help us to, in a values-based environment where we all have one thing in common, which is that we want to have a better society. With that one thing in common, we listen to one another, we hear each other's differences, we listen to the different proposals, the experiences that are brought to the table, and that type of civil society dialogue is probably the most important thing we can do as we move forward in this period of development in Ukraine. And so I think we're very proud that at Aspen Institute Kyiv, this is the beginning of a longer-term dialogue where we want to bring together everyone who's looking to find solutions, to identify the challenges and find those solutions. So I welcome everyone to take a look at the Aspen Institute Kyiv website, pay some attention to when these expert discussions are held and how, and participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and of course I can also only encourage everyone to check the information on the Digital Threats to Democracy Commission. We are looking forward to discussion later today, and I should also greet some of our international portfolios that joined it today. Welcome to Ukraine, and yeah, have a great discussions further. Thank you so much.